Well, thanks everyone for joining this community talk about one of the projects I'm working on at Sciensano, where I will tell you what we're doing regarding standardization and how we use FHIR at Sciensano. So maybe first quick introduction for me, for the ones who don't know me here. I'm Ardon Toonstra, and I'm a FHIR consultant at FHIR, where I help a variety of customers creating or helping them implement FHIR in their own context, where I'm mostly helping them out with creating profiles. And I'm also doing that for Sciensano. So let's introduce them as well. So Sciensano, Research National Public Health Institute of Belgium. They're pretty big, with around 900 people working there, and they do all kinds of things in a variety of topics, ranging from health and disease monitoring to even animal health. And they have the healthdata.be platform and team, which manages the infrastructural side and standardization side of actually getting the data from the data providers towards Sciensano. And I think the health data team is around 100 persons. And for them, we're actually getting up FHIR and helping them standardize. So they have all kinds of research projects. There are more than 19 research projects currently in production. And for every research project, they have at least one or more data collection definitions, which depict exactly which data points the researcher would want to have. And over the years, that have grown over and over again, and it's not really standardized anymore. So for example, although patient is pretty standardized over all the research projects, but still, they could ask different data points of a patient in different research projects on a different way. So that's something they want to tackle. So they started out a couple of years ago with having a look at all the data collection definitions they have. And of course, they saw that a lot of them have a common ground, especially so for all the administrative stuff, like the patient identifiers and the healthcare organization identifiers. And those data can typically also be enriched and found in authentic sources in Belgium. Then a lot of the data collection definitions have a need for actual data that is registered in the healthcare process, in the primary process, which you expect to be normally found in the clinical systems, the lab systems, and so forth. And lastly, every research, or like not every, but a lot of research projects also require very specific data points that normally are not found in the care process. And if they want to retrieve it, people actually need to type in a form or such. And with the whole standardization effort, the idea is to actually focus on the part that is on the data that's actually registered in the care process. So yeah, how they were asking themselves, how are we going to standardize our data collection definitions? And they looked around, they looked at initiatives in the world, and then they saw that in the Netherlands, the neighboring country of Belgium, an initiative was starting up in around 2012, and where clinical building blocks were defined that are an informational model depicting for a certain concept in a healthcare exactly which information concepts are related to it, are important to it, and they describe it with a particular cardinality or even the data types, but it's really independent from any technological representation of it. And they go on in the literature and in the world with all kinds of names. In Belgium, we call them the clinical building blocks. In the Netherlands, they're called zorginformatiebouwstenen or ZIPs. But other words for it are health and care information models. But they're all kind of the same, just information blocks, helping to actually grasp, like, okay, if we talk about the patient, what do we actually mean with that, or which concepts do we want to exchange or register if we want to fill out the patient information model. And here you see an information or the UML of the patient clinical building block, and there are currently more than 100 of them available. So Sciensano knew that was going up, and it took up pace in the Netherlands. So they started out with actually looking at their data collection definitions and try to map all the concepts to a clinical building block from the Netherlands. And they found that like they could easily map 60% of all the concepts to one of those building blocks. And then 10 of those building blocks already cover that 60%. And so, for example, they found that the laboratory test result clinical information block could be mapped to at least 41 projects or 96 DCDs. So, well, that felt like this might be very useful to, well, if we're going to build new data collection definitions, let's use those building blocks so that we will, if we are talking about laboratory test results, we will always have the same concepts that we want to, well, capture. So those zips or clinical building blocks, they were Dutch, not Belgium, and we couldn't really use them. So what we did was we actually proudly copied everything from Nictus. So in Nictus, they maintain the zips and they have it in an enterprise architect file, but they're also located and stored in the RDecor tooling, which has a nice export to FHIR structure definitions as logical models. So we took that, we exported everything to FHIR logical models and then converted it to the Sciensano namespace. We took the input from the health data team and the researchers, but also looked into what is else going on in Belgium with HL7 Belgium and the eHealth, and made sure that we try to, well, get all the requirements that are in Belgium going on and get that into our Belgium clinical building block, which then also formed the basis for also providing FHIR profiles for if we want to exchange that information with FHIR to Sciensano. And for that, we also are depending on the Nictus team because they are also creating FHIR profiles for the zips. So we actually copied them as well, transformed it, and adjusted our, well, the things we adjusted in the clinical building blocks also in the profiles. And you can think about, for example, identifier in Netherlands, they have a BSN as a social security number. In Belgium, that's the Rijksregister number. So that's something definitely needs to change. But also a lot of terminology and code systems are very specific for the Netherlands use case, for example, for the medication registration part, which they do not have in Belgium. So a lot of the terminology stuff needed to be, well, replaced. And therefore we couldn't really have a technological dependency on it because we had so many significant changes. So that's why we needed to copy it. And we maintain a change log for what we changed. So yeah, we have those building blocks and the profiles, and then we added everything in an implementation guide, which is hosted on Simplifier, which we see over here. So we have an internet page where we list all the building blocks on the left side, and every of those building blocks has a page of its own with, on the right side, you see a familiar rendering of that building block, which is a logical model. It's not yet FHIR. And we keep a change log, like I said, with what's in the zip, and also a link to the FHIR profile, which is similarly structured as well. We have like a big index page as well with all the profiles we have so far. Still waiting on Nictus to add the other profiles so we can copy them as well. We don't have to do all the work ourselves. And then we have the profiles we created for it. But yeah, that's just an implementation guide with building blocks. You can't do anything with it yet because they don't have any use case descriptions with it, or they're just building blocks. So to get this working, we have a layered approach of implementation guides. That those clinical building blocks you can kind of see as a core implementation guide for within health data. And then we have, for now, 2 standard use cases. One of them is if you want to exchange laboratory test results, and that just bundles 4 of the clinical building blocks together to a meaningful set consisting of the laboratory test result building block, but also a patient, healthcare organization, and so forth. And then in that IG, we have some extra specifications on how you would achieve that, how you would exchange that. And lastly, we have the DCD, the data collection definition implementation guide, where we will be more specific. And for now, we have a project for HIRA, AP Labo, and that is using the laboratory test results message. But here it actually specifies it that for the HIRA research project, we're only interested in 41 specific pathogens So in that idea, you would say, okay, we use the laboratory test result message, but only for these 40 lab results. And that's actually where we are now. So we are now working on, I think, on actually offering a FHIR endpoint at Sciensano that is able to consume a document bundle of laboratory test results, which can then be processed by Sciensano. And I hope that we can start the pilot, well, this upcoming months very quickly. And it's a document bundle because in Belgium, in other use cases from eHealth, document bundles are also being used for labs. So we try really hard to align with all the other things that are going on in Belgium and not do something completely different. But yeah, so this is very nice. Then, well, we have some challenges in this whole process. First of all, in Belgium, there are at least 3 national languages that are being spoken: English, French, and Dutch. And well, we want to include them in the specs as well, and that's pretty hard. Well, that adds a lot of maintenance and complexity to it, but also what are you going to translate? Because you probably don't want to translate everything. For example, the FHIR specs itself are also in English. And also the tooling is not really working around that. So that's been a thing going on for quite a while. But also actually the standardization of those data collection definition is pretty hard, especially if you try from an existing research project to actually map that to clinical building blocks. That's pretty hard because you have very specific research data point that does not every time map very well, and just a lot of pain. So we only do this actually for new data collection definition that need to be made up to start off with, hey, this is the catalog of things that should be living in the systems, and please use this first, because if you want to do this, well, this is standardized and you can get your data quicker. Maybe you don't have anything and maybe you need to do a lot of computation yourself, but start out here. And the whole goal is to actually have something there that researchers themselves can just have a catalog and click, okay, I want this, this, and this information based on those building blocks. And then the whole process of actually creating the data collection definition and the exchange should be made very quickly. And lastly, for the implementation part, well, it's hard to align with other projects. And also for now, we have chosen to do a POC with things where we don't, we are allowed to actually have personal data that Sciensano can store for a very short amount of time. But for almost all other research projects, Sciensano needs to get the data anonymized. And we're not really sure how that will work with making the specification. So I got 2 quick slides on the multilingual stuff where we did do something already. So for the clinical building blocks, we are translating them using the HL7 translation extension. So everything we want to translate has an extension and has a Dutch and a French thing with it. And we created a little script to export all these fields into an Excel, then give it to a translation service, and then import it again into our logical model. That works very well. And since a release coming up in SimpliFIR, we will have the translations being able to render over here as well. So hopefully in next month, SimpliFIR supports multilingual stuff. And also the implementation guide will be in things based on what's present in those extensions. So I think this was my talk about Sciensano. And if you think something is interesting, please get in touch with me and we can talk about it. And if there are any questions, feel free.
Was easy. Yep. Thank you so much, Ardon. Any questions here in the room? Yeah.
Yay.
Are you, and if you are, how are you dealing with changes to the building blocks that impact your profiles as refinements are made over time? Does it sync or is it a manual process?
It's a manual process, so that's for sure. So the underlying building blocks, they should be pretty stable, and at NICTA's side, they are being released every 3 years. There's an official publication to it. So they are pretty stable, and for now we're still in development mode. So we can make changes if we have something wrong. But if we move over to a new major version of the underlying building blocks. That will be a manual transition and analyzing every step if semantics has been changed. And for that purpose, we also maintain the change log to the things we adjust to the zip profile, and we also make issues if we find something that and note the issues at those spots. But that's going to be quite some work. The profiles aren't that, but still everything we now created are still very drafty, and that's why I'm also very looking forward to the pilot to actually test also the FHIR profiles.
We have one more question from Jose.
Related to this, how do you track the changes from the zibs? So from the moment you copy the content or definitions from the zibs or you adapt them, how strong is that link and how much inheritance will there be? Or if something is clarified in the zibs, how do you transform this into updates or not into the Belgian data?
Yeah, so there's no link, no technical link. Yeah, because we needed to do so many like breaking changes we couldn't derive, unfortunately. And but every change we make ends up in the change log, and I categorize every change, like if it's a textual one or a terminology one. So if you go to the implementation guide and you do the lift, you have a category of the change log and also what we changed and why. I try to, because I know from my previous experience, if you don't actually write down why you do it, then you get
Michael, you had a question or?
Following Simona's talk yesterday, did you consider using questionnaire
Yeah,
components as
definitely.
instead?
I've looked in structured data capture quite a lot, and my first initiative was going with the whole let's go with questionnaires, but I'm also a bit afraid of that. And also the STC is not really implemented in Belgium, I think, or in Netherlands. I know one company that actually has some tooling around it. So I was also, you instantly go into, let's pre-populate all the things, but I think that's also a lot of work to achieve from all the hospitals should be able then to work with that. And I'm going a little bit of all phrases with my question, but still another part is that the FHIR endpoint we're offering at Sciensano is an addition to 3 other methods that data can come in. So they already have some kind of a form, and they already have, you can already upload a CSV file and such. So the whole FHIR endpoint is actually something that, will take quite some time to actually be achieved. But yeah, I think it would be worthwhile to, you need to go to the pain some place to actually standardize and use the resources, and having all the questionnaires already there at Sciensano, I feel more good to just go with the more of like profiling the resources. But it was an interesting talk from Simon. It was like
you had slides with 3-layered implementation guides. These are not FHIR implementation guides.
How do you mean? Or
I mean, do you represent it in a FHIR implementation guide?
No, they're
published, then these are completely different apart from the name implementation guide.
Well, they're not stored in an implementation guide resource, but they are like, they fall under the semantics of being an implementation guide, and we host them on Simplifier, but they're not done or created with the IG publisher as well. But still, I think I would call them an implementation guide. For example, the laboratory test result message contains the specification details on how to actually bundle up all the laboratory test results things in a message that you could send towards Sciensano. Did I get the question? Okay, yeah, okay.
All right, and with that, I would say we switch over to the next presentation.
Okay, nice, thank you.
It's very deep in the and then hope it's because they've already put the problem on it.
starting from a particular place, you can say, well, what are all the sites involving that these procedures involve? And you can search on other properties that exist in SNOMED, which are not really relevant to FHIR. And you can do reference set membership. So reference sets in SNOMED are analogous to value sets in FHIR. And so you can sort of traverse from your expression to say, is my code or is the value of my attribute a member of this value set? So these are the sorts of features that we want to bring across into our solution space. And this is exposed in FHIR at the moment through two mechanisms. One is the filter property called constraint. So in a value set definition, you can say include filter equals constraint operator equals, and then the value is an ECL expression. The other way you can get access to this is through an implicit value set. So you see here, this sort of syntax. This is identifying an implicit value set, and you just drop your ECL expression in here. So you don't need to create anything on the server. You can just put your expression there on the end in this sort of fill out the template, and then you can use that directly in your FHIR search. So you can say search code : in this URI, and that's defined the value set already for you. So that's really handy. So what if all code systems had an ECL-like thing? Well, that'd be really great. So that brings us to where we are now. Well, almost. So there was another conversation that led to a FHIR ticket. This was around term filtering. So one of the things you can't do in a value set at the moment is actually constrain on the descriptions or the designations associated with a code. So this was another gap. There was a discussion at the May 2022 Connectathon, and there was a set of outcomes. And the key thing was a URL-friendly syntax for value set compose that uses a subset variant of ECL. And so that's where we went. So the goals were easy to write and read, compact, URI friendly. So one of the key goals is that we want to be able to use this in these implicit value set URIs. So we don't want to put in characters like, hashes or question marks or ampersands, because then we'll have to percent encode them and then they won't be readable. But we also want to sort of not force white space. So that takes away, it sort of says in a design space, well, we don't want to have keywords as our separators for ands and ors or things like that. So we use punctuation for that. We need to deal with complexities of code systems, because basically any string of characters can be a code, except for the ones that begin and end with white space. So codes can contain white space, they can contain all these other horrible characters. So we need to have syntax that works with that. We had some non-goals. So parity with value set compose was not a goal. We have to be able to do everything you can do in a compose also in this language. Neither was parity with ECL or even ECL compatibility. So it's just a starting point, because it's a sort of known familiar syntax that pointed us in a direction. I did a couple of things. I looked at previous constraint language or query languages for code systems. I looked at things like TQL and OSQL, and there's a whole raft of them. None of them were particularly useful. Often they were very database-like languages. And then I went and looked at, well, what are the real-world requirements? What are the priority things that we need to deal with? I grabbed about 15,000 value sets that have somehow been uploaded to our sandbox terminology server. 5,500 had a filter expression. And then these were the different operator types that I found in those value sets. This is not, and some contain multiple of these, right? So that sort of says, well, hierarchy traversal is really important. These are basically, attribute equals value type things. So this is attribute has a value in a list of codes. So it's just slightly simpler way of doing this. More hierarchy traversal, and then some sort of outliers. So regex on codes, which is for some code systems a way of doing hierarchy traversal. Hello ICD. Exists. So does the property have a value or not? And then this kind of weird is not a. And R5 contains some more operators that didn't occur in any of those things. They're still in scope. So the intuition around VCL, if you don't know ECL, and you're just coming to this from value sets, so you understand there's the compose, include, or exclude filter, is that we have a property, an operator, and a value, and that's how it translates into the language. We put a colon immediately before the operator name in the syntax. That just helps with the parsing. That's basically it. And we've put in some some syntax for traversing the hierarchy. So less than means descendants of, double less than means descendants or self. So the code for the descendants, which is the same as ISA. And then greater than for going up the hierarchy. And then there's some others, less than exclamation mark for just immediate children, that sort of thing. For and or, we have comma and semicolon because they're nice and reasonable punctuation, and we don't have to put white space around the words. And or might show up as code, so that would be really confusing. We have some quoting rules. So where you have string values, you put double quotes around them. Where you have non-trivial codes, you put single quotes around them, and there are escaping rules for the quoting. And where you have URIs, you put angle brackets around them, so the less than, greater than. And then there are a couple of extra features that you can't do in a value set compose. So the path navigation stuff, and then the term filtering. This is not actually in the current proposal yet, and if I have time, I'll talk about why it sort of got stuck. So some quick examples. So we've got the code itself, matches the code itself. Double less than is the code or any descendants of it. We've got wildcard, so star means anything. And then we've got these sort of star colon parent equal B. So this is all codes such that, so you can read the colon as such that. So any code that has a parent with the value B. If you have a code valued property, parent is a code valued property, but you have another code valued property, it's the same sort of syntax. This is a Boolean valued property, so inactive equals true, and so on. And then this is, this matches B, the code B, if its code prop has a value of C. Remembering that, properties here can be multi-valued, so it has at least the value C. And then we have the sort of the navigation. So this is all the values of the code prop for this code B. We can combine things together. So this takes all the descendants of B and gets their code props. And we can do multi-step navigation as well. And we can also constrain values in the context of navigation. And so that all those sorts of features naturally extend. And then here are some examples that do the filter stuff. So give me any code where it has an ingredient. So there is some value for the ingredient property. Match all codes where the code itself matches the regular expression in the quotes, or match a code prop that's in that list of values. I don't expect you to read the grammar. It's going to change. I will have to speed up. So this is how you might have written something with the current details. This is the corresponding expression, any code where scale type equals doc. This is the scale type equals doc. Actually, the star colon is kind of redundant or optional, so you can leave it out and just say scale type equals doc, and there's an implied star colon there. And we're proposing that we add a new filter type that's defined for all code systems called VCL, and you can just put the expression in there. So it's analogous to constraint for SNOMED. So some examples. So this example here, you've got the star colon version as well. All the things that consist of something that has an ingredient equal to 161, which is acetaminophen. If you also want to make sure that they have oral dose form, you can do a conjunction. So that's what the comma is. So that also having oral tablet dose form. Or maybe you want to know what are the available dose forms for these products. So that you can populate a drop-down list and let it someone choose. Then there's a value set membership. So in ECL, the syntax is something like this with this little caret and then the identifier for the reference set. In VCL, it's just the colon in operator and then the value set URI in the angle brackets. And so that's, you can do that in SNOMED in a value set. You can't do it in other code systems, but this gives us that. Now I'll quickly go through some of the open issues. So the designation filtering, that was one of the things that needed to be solved. I haven't done that yet. This is what it would look like in ECL. It's this double curly brackets and it's all a bit ugly and not very URI friendly. And you know, this D makes sense in SNOMED land. It doesn't really make sense for VCL. So I'm seeking input on what people might suggest is useful there. The other thing that's a bit weird about this is that this is not saying it equals this value. It's saying it matches that value. And the matching is word prefix any order matching. There is no way to say it's exactly this unless you use the regex syntax. Is that really what we want? This is what I've proposed as the URI, implicit URI syntax. So it's just the code system URI, this little bit of separator stuff, and then the expression. Should this work for SNOMED as well? And what about code system supplements? So can you use the code system supplement URI here and implicitly use the supplement as well? The alpha implementation we've got in Onto server doesn't do a bunch of the modifiers yet. A couple of them, I'm not really sure they're necessary, but we'll need to just add them all in. It's a fairly straightforward thing. We don't do multi-code system, so this language only does a single code system, and there's the question around code system supplements. So where are we with FHIR 36651? There's a proof of concept implementation, so you can go and play with that at this URL. There's a thread on Zulip. There's obviously the ticket itself if you want to comment, but there's a thread on Zulip. It's already had some traffic this week. And you can talk to me after this or on Twitter or elsewhere. So Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Yep.
So could you talk a bit about what would be the primary use case of this VCL? Would it be mainly for populating user interfaces, or would you also provide it as well as part of a FHIR profile for validation operations?
Yeah, so I mean, you can use it anywhere you can use value sets. So but where we see ECL used is sometimes in value set definitions inside profiles. And you do it that way because you want to put all the metadata around the value set to say versioning, why you're building it, who's maintaining it, and all that kind of thing. But really where the key value lies is in dynamic user interfaces. So for example, if someone selected the procedure, you may want to have allow them to refine the body site to just things that are more specific than the one that's already mentioned in the procedure. Or similarly, you might want to allow them to, they've selected a drug, what dose forms are available. You may want to then populate something dynamically there. And the other key use case is in the analytics space where you're doing dynamic queries over your data for interactive use or what have you. And so you're building these implicit value sets on the fly, interrogating your data.
Is there current reference implementation? Is there already support for, or is support planned for the validation operation in combination with VCL?
Oh yes, of course. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
already.
So Onto Server supports the validate operation on any FHIR resource, but all the terminology validation goes to Onto Server itself. So it's like providing the -TX option to the other ID publisher tools and so forth, and pointing it onto a server, but you can just do it directly in there.
All right. If you have any other questions, I'm sure Mike is happy to answer that over lunch. And that's where
Absolutely.
we're heading
Yeah.
now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.